Wow, what a time to be alive and to witness what is happening. The Gen Z seem to have gotten it right. We have a leadership crisis in this country. The National Assembly, the Senate, Parliament, and the executive are working for self-interest, for self-aggrandizement. They have abandoned pursuit of the common good. No caring for the people or for the services that are delivered to the people. No wonder the anger of the Gen Z is directed at Parliament and at the executive. And why am I saying they've gotten it right? Because of the list of demands they're given. Look at the immediate trigger, the finance bill. What is contained therein is punitive tax measures that will add the burden on the people who need cushioning. It's aimed at the people with a pay slip and with businesses. But if you have a pay slip, you need to attend to your obligation to pay taxes, but also to be left with money to sustain yourself and your family, pushing those with a pay slip to where they may not afford sufficient food for their families, they may not afford education and the basic needs, is to call for anarchy, especially at a time that the ruling elite are splashing the hard-earned taxes on themselves. Look at the travel budget, beginning with the travel budget of Dr. Ruto himself. The just concluded financial year that ended on 30th of June, he spent a whopping 18 billion on foreign travel. He's the most traveled head of state in the history of this country. What are the terms of his job? Isn't it to manage Kenya, to be the lead manager of a corporation called Kenya? You don't manage Kenya by spending most of your time outside Kenya. You manage Kenya by sitting on your desk, getting to know what is going on, and giving appropriate guidance to your troops. He could as well be in a different industry, maybe the airline industry. And why would you utilize 18 billion on travel for a country with a heavy debt burden, a country that is not economically stable? Why would you splash on travel 18 billion, close to the entire budget of the health ministry and close to the entire budget of the education ministry? Because these ministries have 21, 23 billion, when one person in the name of Dr. Ruto has a budget of 18 billion. Apart from this, the hospitality budget. Look at the way the cabinet secretaries have also been traveling. They don't like to go commercial, so quite a number of them hire private jets. And they've learned it from their boss, Dr. Ruto, who hired a jet for 210 million for the recent visit he made to the United States of America. He couldn't fly on a commercial jet on the Kenya Airways. He chose to splash. And I don't buy his explanation that it's a friend who paid. That's not what he told us first. His first response was that it was cheaper than Kenya Airways. When Kenya Airways burst his myth, he came up that a friend paid for it and he only paid 10 million. The Public Officers Ethics Act forbids him and any other state officer from accepting a gift that is more than 20,000 Kenya shillings. So he admitted to breaking the law. The question is, if at all, and I don't believe him, it is friends who paid for that jet. What is he going to give them in return? What are Kenyans going to lose? Because it must be on a quid pro quo basis. Nobody will give you 200 million just like that. So I see the finance bill as the trigger to the Gen Z and Kenyans' anger. It's an anger directed about an uncaring leadership. I've already said leadership that caters only for self-interest and self-aggrandizement. Look at the quality of services that we are getting as Kenyans. The health services have all but collapsed. We've had doctors on the streets demanding for implementation of their CBA, which was negotiated with the government, and it doesn't matter which era. A government is deemed to be continuous. So an incoming government assumes responsibility for all things legitimately done. The doctor's CBA was and is still legitimate. Look at the time it took the Ruto administration to negotiate with the doctors for them to return to work. Look at the arrogance with which the doctors were handled. To date, we have the clinical officers who have been on the streets for more than 90 days, more than 3 months. Clinical officers are the first port of call. They are slightly more than the doctors, and they're the ones who populate all our health facilities countrywide. Even in hospitals, county hospitals, you see the clinical officer before seeing the doctor. So if they are out for over 3 months, it means Kenyans, especially the vulnerable, are not accessing health services. Look at the JSS teachers, junior secondary school, who too were on strike. And look at the budget that promised they would get back. We are not being told whether when Ruto agreed or acceded to the Gen Z demands to drop the finance bill, a process that is still on, whether his not a tax reduction, but spending reduction measures still include employment of the JSS teachers, whether it includes the doctor's CBA, whether it even contemplates the demands of the clinical officers who again have a legitimate CBA and whose total demand for the year, paying all their allowances, is just about 1 billion. Is Dr. Ruto considering reducing his travel, his entertainment budget, because this money for the clinical officers can easily come from his budget? So is the money for the doctors who needed just about 5 billion. A lot of things can be fixed by remembering that the reason Kenyans put leaders in position is to look after the common good, not to pander to self-interest, a return to the basics. What is the reason for having leaders? Leaders are trustees. Their first duty is to act in the best interest of the people. And those are the values contained in our Constitution in Article 10. Those are the principles of leadership and integrity in Chapter 6. Which brings me to the point that if we implemented our 2010 Constitution to the full, that gives us a roadmap to do what is right. Remembering that the Constitution is a negotiated document that Kenyans bequeathed unto themselves. But since it came into effect on the 27th of August 2010, it has not been fully implemented. Chapter 6 on leadership and integrity has been thrown out of the window. Our national values embodied in Article 10 have been thrown out. The sovereignty of the people in Article 1 has been completely forgotten, thanks to the Gen Z. Kenyans have now been able to reclaim Article 1 and to exercise their sovereignty. The Constitution we abandoned, the independent Constitution, was following very much the old English tradition, remembering that the British were our colonial masters, where there is reverence for the crown, where the sovereign is the queen. So when we got independence, the president of Kenya became the new sovereign. The Constitution stated that Parliament was supreme. But our 2010 Constitution abandoned all this. And Kenyans gave themselves sovereignty. Kenyans made themselves the citizens collectively, the ones who hold power in this nation, sovereignty, which belongs to the people collectively. So it is Kenyans who donate power to the government. And the government consists of three institutions: the executive, parliament, and the judiciary. What does this mean? It means that any actions of the executive must be informed by the best interests of the nation. That is the best interest of the people, not of the executive, not of the ruling class. So if we are short of money, they are obliged to prioritize the needs of the people above their needs. So what does the Constitution tell Dr. William Ruto? Prioritize the health of the people, prioritize education of our children, prioritize basic needs, such as ensuring that people can afford and access adequate food. Prioritize the housing of our people, prioritize water, prioritize the basic needs as you are commanded to by Article 43 of the Constitution. This is the same message our Constitution is giving to Parliament and to the judiciary. So as a member of Parliament, looking at the Finance Bill 2024, your thoughts should have been with the people and asking, what would this bill mean to the people? What will it do to the people? If it is punitive taxation, then it is not a bill in the interest of the people. The people have an obligation to pay taxes. for the common good, but paying taxes should not be punitive. Taxes is a form of contribution to our collective welfare. It ceases to be when it becomes punitive. It reminds us of the colonial era, when Kenyans who were poverty-stricken at the time because the colonialists had taken all the means of production, which was land, and pushed Kenyans to crowded places, but then was taxing Kenyans on the basis of the number of huts in your compound. That was the hut tax. So that even if you have built a house for your children, it is taxed. This is what is happening to people with a payslip. One of the principles of taxation is that it should be affordable, not punitive. So one of the considerations should be, can people afford it? Clearly, the taxation measures contained in the now bill whose future is uncertain were punitive. And this is not the first time. The punitive measure started in 2023. Kenyans protested, made their voice known, but with full impunity, Parliament and the executive rushed the bill through. It was now happening a second time. Thank you, our children and grandchildren, the Gen Z, for helping Kenya to regain its voice, for helping the population to reclaim their agency, and to say no so loudly that the executive and Parliament have now beaten a hasty retreat. But at what cost? So many of our children dead. So many of our people injured deliberately by police. So much destruction of property at the behest of goons hired reliably by political operatives and leaders from the KK regime, and with their knowledge and tacit approval. No wonder police have been shown on the media sitting idle as looting continues. A supermarket was looted for 3 hours while the police sat idle. The trigger-happy police are very quick to shoot our unarmed children peacefully protesting, but they will give cover to goons to loot and to burn buildings. Our children were out in the street protesting for more than 4 days before the Ruto regime, through their underhand methods, hired goons to infiltrate the protest and to cause mayhem, in my view, as an excuse for killing the innocent. You can see that the destruction and looting started on the day police deliberately unleashed murder and mayhem, mainly in the city of Nairobi, in Mombasa, and they spread throughout the country where there were protests. This is Ruto's and his administration's signature method of pushing back on the constitutional right to demonstrate and to picket. And I want to remind Kenyans, it happened again last year, 2023, during the Azimio protests. The protests would be peaceful until police introduce not only tear gas, but savagery, brutalizing the people and shooting. This time, the Gen Z had managed to police themselves to have very peaceful protests, and the only thing we would notice some of them with in their hands were their phones to communicate. Even when they were being shot dead at Parliament, their humanity remained with them. That is why they were able to help a disabled member of Parliament. You could see them taking selfies in the chamber, not destroying. You could see them conversing near the mausoleum and telling each other, just have a look, but don't touch. I can vouch that the destruction in Parliament was by paid goons to give an excuse to kill our children for self-protection. It is a method Ruto and his regime have used before to stop protests. So it's all about leadership. Leadership that does not care for the lives of Kenyans. Ruto in his own mouth when he talked to the press. When asked about the dead and the injured, all he could say is about what by that time he was saying is damage worth 2.5 billion. Can human life be compared to money? And if there is destruction, who is supposed to maintain law and order? When there are demonstrations, it is the duty of the police. And the police, whose power is also donated by the people, appear to not have remembered what the Constitution says. They must exercise their power for the good of the people, not the good of the ruling elite. They owe nothing to William Ruto or the ruling elite. They owe him safety, as any other Kenyan, and there are hundreds deployed to guard him. The rest who keep and maintain law and order in the country, they owe each and every citizen protection of their lives and property. To the police force, why can't you obey the letter and the spirit of the Constitution? Safeguard the lives of all Kenyans, not just the life of William Ruto and his regime, but the lives of every Kenyan. The property of every Kenyan. Those traders down the street, whom you supervised. I say supervised in quotes because you were deployed in large numbers, but you did not intervene when the properties were being destroyed. Your sole intervention was shooting unarmed protesters. And this happened in Nairobi, in Mombasa, in Nyeri, and in many other places all over the country. We have seen the destruction that has happened. You have failed in your duty as a police service. But I want to be quick to say not every officer has failed. It is those who have disobeyed the law, mainly the leadership, and those deployed to deliberately subvert the Constitution by killing instead of protecting the people, by supervising destruction instead of protecting property. Again, the problem we are having, leadership. Where are the leaders? Where is the IG? Is he fit to lead the police service? Is the officer commanding Nairobi Police Station fit to lead the service? The answer is no, they are not, because they were unable to execute their duties in accordance with the Constitution. They supervised loss of life and destruction of property instead of protecting both. They have shown contempt of the people. Remember that image of a police officer using a club to hit unarmed protesters especially the two women sitting near the fence of Parliament. We have seen people being clapped, and we have seen on the media a police officer, after an altercation with the people, going towards the car where he can safely enter, and then he quickly unleashes his gun on peaceful people who are standing by and whom he had just finished engaging. This is the behavior of a rogue police force. We must weed out those rogue elements, because the larger part of the police force consists, I believe, of law-abiding police officers. The rogue elements, who include the leadership, ought to be weeded out. Is Dr. William Ruto up to the task? Certainly he's not. He began during his address to the nation through the media by commending the police officers. He did not empathize or regret loss of life. He just commended them for acting well. For him, all that was necessary is to kill and maim in order to scare people from exercising their rights. In his mind, all that matters is that he remains on the throne. That's not why he's in that position. That's not what he swore. He swore to defend, to obey, protect, and defend the Constitution of Kenya. That sword he was given is a symbolic sword to symbolize protection of the people and their rights. It is not a sword to kill, Dr. William Ruto. This is not a sword to kill. It's a symbol for the protection of the people and the nation. You have subverted the Constitution by repeatedly superintending over the killing of innocent Kenyans, over the maiming of innocent Kenyans, over the subversion of the right to demonstrate and to picket. You may appear to be winning because you have pushed back the protesters illegally and constitutionally. But I just want to remind us, in history, a people united have never been defeated. It may take time, but this is a battle you cannot win. Collectively, Kenyans everywhere are saying what is happening is not right. They want their rights as enshrined in the Constitution protected. They want the government, all the three arms, to work for them and not for self-interest. Parliament must stop pursuing enhancement of their parts. They must revisit, and if they don't, Kenyans will revisit whether it's necessary to have allowances, sitting allowances for a job you have a monthly salary to perform. They must revisit their travel budgets, just like we have told Dr. William Ruto too. Extravagant travel budgets, extravagant per diems. Are all those journeys necessary? What is this you are benchmarking? And you've been benchmarking, yet it's not rubbing off when you're executing your duties. You visit countries that are orderly, that are giving people their basic services. If that has not rubbed off, it is time we cut nearly to zero the travel budgets of Parliament. And I'm talking about Parliament at the national level and the county assemblies as well. Why don't you benchmark through Zoom? After all, COVID taught us that you can do meetings, you can do exchanges just through Zoom and other means of communication. These are issues that we must revisit. While we cannot have enough money for education, we are defunding education, secondary education, university education. We are late in giving capitation, even for primary education. Isn't it time we did away with the trouble budgets? What about the CSs and the senior civil servants? We must revisit trouble budgets. We must also revisit entertainment or hospitality budgets across the board, starting with Dr. William Ruto's hospitality budget, where it has been shown that State House uses 23 million a day, which is equivalent to 1 million per hour. We can't afford that. So the executive, the highest level of the executive, leads in extravagance. This is what is paining Kenyans. You want to break the back of the vulnerable to sustain luxury at the top. Why do you need advisors, Dr. William Ruto? Governors, CSs, why do you need advisors? For Dr. William Ruto, your CSs are your advisors. You cannot employ the incompetent so that you saddle us with a bill of a host of advisors. For governors, your executive, county executive officers, that is your cabinet, are your advisors. So stop saddling the counties with advisors. Stop giving us CASs, Dr. William Ruto. They are not envisaged in the Constitution. Trim your establishment. Austerity measures must be seen everywhere. Respect the lives and property of the people. Stop ruling by propping yourself up with goons. Obey the Constitution. Shape up or ship out. That's the message the Gen Z are given. And that's the message we as Kenyans must ponder. And you, public officer, whatever level, ask yourself, are you faithfully serving Kenyans or other interests? Power belongs to the people. The people must be given service. You are the judiciary. Your decisions must be for the common good. You hold your job courtesy of the people, not courtesy of the executive. Decisions that prop the executive to keep the army on the streets are clearly untenable, and many, many other decisions. You are the EACC who lets a governor get off on a charge of embezzling 2 billion by returning only under 300 billion back. You are making corruption fashionable. You are encouraging corruption, and you are an institution that is supposed to fight corruption. I have not mentioned all the offices and everything going wrong, but this is a sample of what is going wrong. It's a crisis of leadership. Leadership by those entrusted with power. Listen to the demands of the Gen Z. They have given a very good list even to our religious leaders. Stop corrupting the values enshrined in our Constitution. That is the message to all Kenyans. Let's take time and listen. Let us correct what is wrong with our nation.